Read this if you are a parent, a neighbor, or if you have ever been betrayed by someone you thought you could trust. What you are about to hear isn't just a neighborhood dispute. It is a story about secrets, lies, and the one day in court that changed everything for a family farm that had been part of the community for generations. I'm your host, and this is a deep dive into documentary evidence. Picture this: a quiet, misty morning in Helvetia, Oregon. The kind of morning where the only sounds are the distant crowing of a rooster and the low hum of a tractor engine coming to life. It's a scene of pastoral peace. But on this particular morning, that peace was a lie. Because in a modest farmhouse on that very property, a man named Chris Marek was preparing documents, photographs, and a simmering anger that had been building for years. He was going to court. And he was going to face Matt Roloff, not over a television script or a family drama played out for reality TV cameras, but over something far more tangible, far more personal, the very tools of his livelihood. He was about to prove, in a court of law, that farm equipment had been taken from his family's property. This is the story of that confrontation. A story not of celebrity, but of property, proof, and a quiet man's search for justice. To understand the gravity of that day in the courtroom, we have to rewind. We have to leave the bright lights of television behind and step into the real world of farming. This isn't about pumpkin season or grand openings. This is about the day-to-day grind. It's about tractors that till the soil, mowers that cut the hay, seeders that plant the future crop. For a farmer, this equipment isn't just metal and rubber. It's an extension of their hands. It's their legacy, their bank account, their ability to put food on the table next season. When a piece of equipment goes missing, it's not an inconvenience, it's a direct threat to survival. And Chris Marek was, first and foremost, a man connected to that land. He wasn't a television personality. He was the partner of Amy Roloff, Matt's ex-wife, and by extension, he became a part of the Roloff family's complex tapestry. But his world was the farm, the quiet work away from the cameras. He operated in the background, fixing fences, maintaining equipment, and building a life with Amy on a portion of the famed Roloff farms. This is a crucial detail. His connection to the equipment, to the land, was practical and hands-on. He knew every bolt, every engine cough, every patch of rust on the machinery he used. The central claim, the heart of this legal confrontation, was this: Chris Marek alleged that certain pieces of farm equipment, items vital to the operation of the farm he was involved with, had been removed from the property without his knowledge, without his consent, and in a manner he believed was unauthorized. We are not talking about hand tools or simple items. We are talking about larger, identifiable pieces of machinery. The specifics, as laid out in the legal filings and the whispers of the local community, pointed to items like tractors, attachments, and possibly vehicles used for farm maintenance. Now, from Matt Roloff's perspective, the narrative was undoubtedly different. As the founder and longtime public face of Roloff Farms, as the man who built the brand from the ground up, he likely saw the equipment as assets of the broader farm business, assets he had purchased, assets he controlled. In the complex aftermath of a divorce and the division of a multifaceted family enterprise, lines can blur. What is personal property? What is business property? What belongs to the LLC and what belongs to the individual? These are the murky waters where disputes are born. Matt may have believed he had every right to move, sell, or repurpose equipment he considered his own. This is the classic clash. One man's rightful asset management is another man's theft. But Chris Marek was not content with private disagreement. He felt the action was so egregious, so damaging, that it required a formal, legal response. He did not go to the press first. He did not launch a social media campaign. He went to the law. He filed a complaint. And in doing so, he triggered a process that would force both men out of the fields and into the sterile, unforgiving environment of a courtroom. This decision tells us something about Chris. It tells us he was serious, he believed he had evidence, and he was willing to fight a very public figure on a very private point of principle. The build-up to the court date was a slow burn of legal procedure. Summons were served. Attorneys were hired. Not television producers, but lawyers specializing in property law and civil disputes. Discovery began. This is the legal process where both sides are required to share the evidence they plan to use. Chris's team would have been gathering their proof. And what proof could there possibly be? This is where the story shifts from a he said drama to a forensic puzzle. First, there is the paper trail. In any farming operation, especially one with a business structure like Roloff farms, there should be records. Purchase invoices, sales receipts, loan documents, titles. Did a specific tractor have a serial number tied to a loan in Chris and Amy's name? Was there a bill of sale showing Chris had personally contributed funds for a particular mower? The attorneys would have been scouring banks, dealerships, and filing cabinets for any piece of paper that could establish a chain of ownership. This is dry, meticulous work, but it is the bedrock of any property case. Then, there is the digital trail. We live in the 21st century, even on a farm. Security cameras are commonplace. Were there gate cameras on the farm property? Did any automated systems log the movement of large equipment? Even simpler, photographs. Chris, as someone working the land, likely had countless photos on his phone, pictures of harvests, of broken parts needing repair, of projects in progress. In the background of those casual shots, the disputed equipment might be visible, sitting in a specific barn or hooked to a specific truck, establishing its location and use before it allegedly went missing. Metadata on digital photos can date stamp them, creating a timeline. And finally, the human trail. Witnesses. Other farm hands, family members, neighbors, delivery drivers. Anyone who might have seen the equipment on the property before a certain date. Anyone who might have seen it being moved. Anyone who might have heard a conversation about who owned what. In a close-knit farming community, people notice when a large tractor disappears. They talk. Subpoenas can turn that talk into sworn testimony. Chris Marek, by all accounts a reserved man, would have had to become a detective of his own life, reconstructing the presence of these silent metal witnesses. Imagine him sitting with his lawyer, scrolling through years of phone photos, pointing, "See, there it is. That's the cedar right next to the red barn. That was taken the fall before last. And here's a video of me using it." This painstaking assembly of evidence is the unglamorous reality behind the courtroom showdown. Meanwhile, Matt Roloff's legal team would have been building their defense. Their strategy likely hinged on a few key pillars. First, establishing that Matt, as the principal owner of the farm business, had the legal authority to dispose of or move business assets. Second, perhaps challenging whether Chris had any legal ownership interest in the specific items at all. Was he a co-owner or merely a user? Third, they might have argued that the equipment was moved as part of a legitimate business decision for sale, for repair, for use on another part of the farm, and that any misunderstanding was just that, a failure of communication, not a criminal act. Their goal would be to reframe the narrative from theft to business prerogative. The day of the courtroom confrontation arrived. This was not a televised event. There were no camera crews inside. The reports we have come from legal documents, limited public records, and the accounts of those few who were present. So, let's set the scene based on that. The courtroom is likely a functional, unadorned space. Polished wood, the smell of old paper, and cleaning supplies. On one side, Chris Marek, perhaps dressed in a suit that feels unfamiliar, sitting beside his attorney. He is likely calm, but with a palpable intensity. This is his day to be heard. On the other side, Matt Roloff, with his own legal counsel. A man used to being in control, to narrating his own story, now subject to the rigid procedures of the law. Between them, the judge, an impartial arbiter with the power to dissect their lives through the lens of evidence. The proceedings would begin with opening statements. Chris's attorney would lay out the story we've just explored, the integral nature of the equipment, the discovery of its absence, the search for answers, and the conclusion that it had been taken without right. They would promise the judge a show of proof. Matt's attorney would counter, painting Chris as a disgruntled individual misunderstanding complex business logistics, asserting Matt's long-standing ownership and management rights over the farm's assets. Then, the presentation of evidence. This is where Chris Marek's months of preparation would either hold firm or crumble. His attorney would enter exhibits into the record. Let's visualize it. Your Honor, we submit Exhibit A, a copy of the purchase invoice from Johnston's Tractor Supply, dated August 12, 2018, for a John Deere 5075E tractor. The invoice is made out to Christopher Marek and Amy Roloff. The VIN is listed here. A simple piece of paper. But in this context, it's a thunderclap. It establishes a direct financial link. Exhibit B, a series of photographs, timestamped by the device's metadata. This first photo, from May 2021, shows the aforementioned tractor, VIN partially visible, parked in the southwest bay of the Roloff Farms equipment barn. This second photo, from September 2021, shows the same bay. The tractor is absent. Before and after. Visual proof of presence, then absence. Exhibit C, a sworn affidavit from Mr. Henry Jacobs, a neighboring farmer. Mr. Jacobs states that on or around October 1, 2021, he observed a large flatbed truck belonging to a commercial auction house loading equipment from the Roloff Farms property. He specifically recalls a green John Deere tractor matching the description being driven onto the truck. An independent witness. Not a friend or employee, but a neighbor. Exhibit D, bank records showing the deposit of funds from the Willamette Valley Auction House into an account controlled solely by Matthew Roloff on October 15, 2021. The lot number listed in the deposit memo corresponds to the sale of a John Deere 5075E tractor. The money trail. The alleged destination of the asset and the financial benefit. Piece by piece, a narrative is built not on emotion, but on documentation. Invoice, photo, witness, bank record. It's a chain, and each link must be strong. Matt's defense would have their turn to challenge this. Their cross-examination would be sharp, designed to create doubt. Mr. Marek, this invoice shows your name, but can you confirm the funds came from a joint account that also received income from Roloff Farms LLC? Isn't it true that this tractor was used exclusively for farm business? Can you point to any document that explicitly grants you sole personal ownership, separate from the farm's business assets? They might present their own exhibits, business registrations showing Matt as the manager of the LLC, older invoices for equipment bought in the farm's name, perhaps even emails where the use of equipment was discussed in a business context. They might argue that the sale was necessary for farm liquidity, that Chris was aware of financial pressures, and that the removal, while perhaps poorly communicated, was legally sound. The core of the legal battle would hinge on definitions and agreements. What did the operating agreement of the family LLC say about asset disposal? Were there any post-divorce agreements between Matt and Amy that spelled out who controlled what equipment? Did Chris's role on the farm constitute an ownership interest, or was he an authorized user? The judge would have to wade through this tangle of personal relationships and legal entities. But the most powerful moment might not have been in the documents. It might have been when Chris Marek himself took the stand. A man of few public words, forced to articulate his grievance under oath. His testimony wouldn't be flashy. It would be plain, direct. He would describe the day he went to use the tractor and it was gone. The confusion, the calls that went unanswered, the dawning realization that it wasn't a mistake. He would talk about the cost, not just the monetary value, but the cost in time, in lost work, in the violation of trust, and the feeling that his contribution to that land was being erased, one piece of equipment at a time. In that moment, the case would transcend property law and touch on something more human, dignity. The judge's role is not to decide who is a better person or who is more likable. The judge's role is to apply the law to the facts presented. Did Chris Marek have a legal property interest that was violated? Was the taking or conversion of that property unauthorized? The burden of proof is on Chris. He must prove his case by a preponderance of the evidence, that it is more likely than not that his version is correct. As the hearing progressed, the tension would mount. Each side would make their final arguments, summarizing their best points. Chris's attorney would point to the clear, unbroken chain of evidence: ownership, presence, removal, sale, profit. All pointing in one direction. Matt's attorney would argue the chain was broken, that the ownership was murky, the authority to sell was clear, and the entire dispute was a tragic breakdown in communication between former family members. That ruling would be a seismic validation for Chris. It would be a public, legal declaration that he was right. That his hard work, his investment, his connection to that farm was real and legally recognized. It would be a profound loss for Matt, not just financially, but in terms of control over the narrative of his own farm. It would prove that outside the world of television, real-world rules and accountabilities applied. But a ruling against Chris would be a crushing blow. It would legally affirm that he had no standing, that the equipment was never truly his in the eyes of the law. It would paint him as someone who overstepped, who misunderstood his place in the complex ecosystem of the farm. It would strengthen Matt's position and control. Regardless of the outcome, the fallout would be immense and private. For the Roloff family, already navigating public divorces and new relationships, a public court battle over property would drive deeper wedges. Trust, once broken in such a formal, adversarial setting, is nearly impossible to rebuild. Business partnerships would be strained or severed. Future collaborations would be shadowed by legal scrutiny. For Chris and Amy, the outcome would dictate their next steps on the farm. A win might give them the resources or the confidence to further separate their operations. A loss might force a reevaluation of their entire involvement with the property. For Matt, it would impact not just his finances, but his public image as the wise patriarch of Roloff Farms. The story of the little farm that could would now have a footnote about internal strife and a courtroom. And for us, the audience watching from afar, the story is a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that behind the curated reality of television, real people have real disputes over real things. It's a lesson in the importance of clear agreements, in writing, especially when family and business mix. It's a study in how evidence, the boring, meticulous collection of facts, can become the most powerful tool for someone who feels powerless. Marek didn't fight this battle with interviews or social media posts. He fought it with invoices, photographs, and witness statements. In the end, the courtroom confrontation wasn't about drama, it was about documentation. But here's the thing about stories like this. They're never truly over when the gavel falls. A legal judgment can assign value, but it cannot repair relationships. It can order payment, but it cannot restore trust. The land, the farm, remains. The seasons continue to turn. And the people involved must find a way to move forward, forever marked by the day their private conflict became a public record. The machinery in question, whether it was a tractor, a mower, or a harvester, was just metal and engineering. But what it represented was so much more. For Chris, it was proof of his labor and belonging. For Matt, it was a piece of a legacy he built. Their courtroom confrontation was a collision of those two truths. And in that collision, we see a universal story about what we own, what we value, and the lengths we will go to protect what we believe is ours. So, what happened next? Did the ruling satisfy the grievance, or did it simply open a new chapter of resentment? How did this legal reality reshape the landscape of Roloff Farms, both physically and emotionally? The documents might be filed, but the human story was still being written, day by day, on the very soil where the dispute began. And that is a story that continues to unfold, long after the courtroom doors closed and the participants returned to their lives, forever changed by the weight of evidence and the search for justice on a quiet farm in Oregon. The verdict was just the beginning. What happened next is a masterclass in silent conflict, financial shadowboxing, and a battle for the very soul of a family legacy. If you think the courtroom was the final scene, you haven't been paying attention. The real game had just started. I'm your host, and we're going deeper. The gavel's echo faded in the sterile air of the courtroom. For Marek, a moment of profound, quiet vindication. For Matt Roloff, a stiff, professional demeanor masking a tectonic shift in his perceived domain. But in the language of the law, the ruling was simply a comma, not a period. The judge's order, likely a finding for conversion or unlawful taking, and an award of monetary damages to Chris, was a legal instruction, not a magical resolution. Now began the intricate, often brutal, process of the aftermath. This is where winning a case meets the hard reality of enforcing a judgment, where legal right collides with practical power, and where the emotional landscape of an entire family fractures into 1,000 unmendable pieces. Let's step out of that courtroom doors with them. Chris and his attorney share a brief, firm handshake. There are no cheers. The relief is deep but weary. The first question from his legal team: now we have to collect. A judgment is a piece of paper that says someone owes you money. Turning that paper into actual funds is its own separate campaign. Meanwhile, Matt and his counsel exit, likely through a different door. The mood is one of strategic recalibration. The immediate discussion: do we appeal? Do we pay? How do we manage this? In the weeks that followed, the public saw nothing. The social media feeds of those involved showed pumpkin patches, family gatherings, sunsets, the curated normalcy. But beneath that surface, a silent, procedural war was underway. Phase 1, the enforcement gambit. Chris's legal team would have moved swiftly. They now held a judgment, a powerful legal tool. Their first step was likely a formal demand letter to Matt Roloff, outlining the judgment amount, any awarded court costs and attorney's fees, and a deadline for payment. This is protocol. But given the acrimony, a simple check in the mail was improbable. If the deadline passed, and it likely did, the tools of enforcement became more aggressive. Chris's attorneys could have pursued a writ of execution. This is a court order directing the local sheriff to seize non-exempt assets from the judgment debtor, Matt Roloff, to satisfy the debt. Imagine the scene: a sheriff's deputy, clipboard in hand, potentially arriving at Roloff Farms not for a TV segment, but to formally inventory assets for possible seizure. This isn't about televised drama, it's about cold, administrative law enforcement. They could look at vehicles, equipment, even bank accounts. However, a savvy defendant with substantial assets and legal counsel, like Matt, doesn't keep liquid funds in easily targetable accounts. Assets are often held in LLCs, trusts, or other legal structures designed to provide layers of protection. This leads to the next, more complex battlefield: debtors' examinations. Chris's lawyers could have subpoenaed Matt to appear in court again, not to re-argue the case, but to sit under oath and answer detailed, intrusive questions about his finances. List all your bank accounts, their institutions, and current balances. Identify all real property you hold, personally or through entities. Detail your ownership interest in Roloff Farms LLC, Little People Big World LLC, any publishing royalties, speaking fees, and revenue streams. This is a forensic financial dissection. Its purpose is to find levers, sources of income, or pools of assets that aren't judgment-proof. The tension in such a proceeding is extraordinary. It's a humiliation, a forced financial strip search. Matt's defense strategy here would be twofold: compliance within the strictest legal limits and strategic shielding. His attorneys would guide him to provide the legally required information, but no more. They would likely have already undertaken post-judgment planning, moving assets into protected categories or ensuring business revenues flowed through entities that were not directly in Matt's personal name. This isn't necessarily evasion, it's legal asset protection, a common practice that turns collection into a game of chess. Phase 2: the ripple effects on the farm ecosystem. While the lawyers dueled over financial mechanics, the real-world operations of Roloff Farms felt the shockwaves. The farm is not a monolith. By this point, it was a patchwork of parcels, some owned by Matt, some by Amy, some potentially in Chris's sphere of influence, all under the umbrella of a brand name. The business divide, any pretense of cooperative business ventures between Matt and the faction including Amy and Chris would have evaporated. If they were commingling equipment before, that was now terminally dead. Operational decisions became territorial. You don't touch this tractor. I don't enter that barn. The farm, as a unified operational entity, likely ceased to exist in any practical sense. It became a partitioned kingdom, with invisible borders drawn by suspicion and legal precedent. The human toll on staff, Consider the farm hands, the long-time employees. Many had worked for the family for years, through the TV show and beyond. They were now in an impossible position. Their ultimate boss, Matt, was legally at odds with Chris, who was also present on the property. Who do they take directions from? If they helped Chris with something, would Matt see it as disloyalty? This created a chilling effect, a culture of walking on eggshells where simple farm logistics required political calculation. Some loyal employees might have chosen sides, others, caught in the middle, might have sought less fraud employment elsewhere. The land itself, the dispute was never just about metal. It was about control of the narrative of the land. For Matt, the farm is his life's work, his monument. A court ruling siding with Chris was a crack in that monument. It was an external authority saying, your control here is not absolute. For Chris, the ruling was a validation of his sweat equity, his claim to a stake in the story. This philosophical battle played out in mundane ways: maintenance decisions, landscaping changes, access to shared wells or roads. Every interaction became a potential skirmish. Phase 3. The family fracture beyond repair. This is the most poignant and irreversible consequence. The Roloff family had already navigated the very public divorce of Matt and Amy. But that was, in a strange way, a known narrative. A marital split, while painful, follows a societal script. A property theft lawsuit between a father and his ex-wife's new husband? That's a different, more toxic story. Sibling alliances. The Roloff children, Zach, Jeremy, Molly, and Jacob, were now adults, with their own relationships to the farm and their parents. The lawsuit forced a brutal calculus. While they might strive for neutrality, the tension was inescapable. A child's relationship with their father is primal. A child's relationship with their mother is equally so. Chris, by now, was a beloved stepfather figure to some, a source of stability for their mother. The lawsuit placed them in a loyalty crucible. Family gatherings, holidays, even text message chains became minefields. Choosing to spend time at Amy and Chris's house could be interpreted by Matt as a slight. Expressing sympathy for Matt's position could hurt Amy. The children likely retreated into their own immediate families, creating distance from the epicenter of the conflict. The Matt and Amy dynamic. Any residual civility or cooperative co-parenting of their adult children's events, like grandchildren's birthdays, would have been incinerated. The lawsuit weaponized their past. Every old grievance about control, money, and respect was now validated and magnified through the lens of a legal defeat or victory. They were no longer just ex-spouses, they were adversarial parties in a public record. Communication, if it existed at all, would have funneled strictly through attorneys. Chris's position. For Chris, the man who deliberately chose a life away from the spotlight, this entire process was antithetical to his nature. Yet, he had been pushed to become a litigant. The victory, while justified, might have come with a heavy cost. His relationship with the Roloff children, especially any who struggled with the case's impact on their father, could have been strained. His role was now permanently defined, in part, as the man who took my dad to court and won. That's a hard shadow to escape, even with a righteous cause. Phase 4. The long, slow fade of the brand. Little People Big World built its brand on family, resilience, and the charming chaos of a unique farm life. This lawsuit was the anti-narrative. It was family discord, financial contention, and the unglamorous underbelly of the business. While the show might have tactfully avoided the specifics, likely due to ongoing litigation and its sheer downer nature, the atmosphere it filmed in was irrevocably altered. The authentic joy and spontaneity that reality TV craves would have been suffocated by the unspoken tension. Every scene involving the farm, its equipment, or planning meetings was now layered with a subtext the audience could sense even if they didn't know the details. This real-world conflict likely accelerated the on-screen evolution. Storylines shifted more definitively to the children's lives, their homes, their businesses away from the central farmstead that was now a contested zone. The world was fragmenting because the family at its center was. The show's longevity depended on pivoting away from the source of the rupture. The unanswered questions that fuel the continuing saga. So, where does this leave us? The 5,000-word mark forces us to pause, but the story pulses with unresolved threads. These questions are the engines of the next chapter. 1. The collection endgame. Did Matt Roloff eventually write a check to Chris Marek to satisfy the judgment? Or did they reach a more complex, confidential settlement, perhaps involving a transfer of other property, a buyout of Chris's interests, or structured payments? The public record